Okay.
All right. Hello, everybody. If you're joining us, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 660th New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the real pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Joe Bradley and Terry Myers on the event of Joe Bradley's show New Paltz at Xavier Hufkins. We are thrilled to welcome poet Greg Masters here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. In his paintings, drawings, sculptures, and mixed media works, Joe Bradley has produced a visual language that oscillates freely between personal and art historical references. Constantly reinventing himself, he cycles through some of the most iconic modes of abstraction, investigating minimalist questions of color and form, tapping into the spontaneous gesture of abstract expressionism, and creating cryptic signs and symbols in ingenious, lively drawings. And our host today, Terry R. Myers, is an editor-at-large of The Rail. His next book, titled Reviews 1988 to 2020, brings together every exhibition review he wrote over those 32 years, and it will be available very soon. And with that, thank you all again so much for being here. I'll turn it over to you, Terry.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, everyone at The Rail, Fog. Thank you so much, Joe. As we were talking before we started, you are a very short, good list for me of people, so I'm very happy to have this opportunity. I asked Carolyn to just do a very short bio because I'm going to pitch that here's the rough copy of the reviews book. It's the length of Moby Dick. Wow. So I am pretending that I actually took 32 years to write a novel. A great painter whose killer painting is behind me, Keith Tolch, did the cover. I know Keith is in the audience here too. If you don't know your work and you care about painting, you should know it. So I'm gonna take hopefully the more entertaining part of my years of teaching, and I'm gonna run the images just because I'm built that way, I guess. So I'm going to share my screen. And you should be seeing first installation view from the show that we're going to focus on today of Joe's. It's currently on view in Brussels. Xavier Hufkins, I just mispronounced it. This was a thing before we started. But Joe, as I told you, I sort of have one thing that I'm planning to start with, but I'm curious. I always like to start with artists especially artists I respect, to just ask you, what's the thing that's on your mind? What first comes to your mind looking at this painting in this room, this image?
Oh God. I mean, this painting was I think there were 13 paintings in this recent show, and this one felt like it was one of my favorites out of the group. And it feels like a very figurative painting to me. I don't know if you read that, but and it also has this funny little curly Q in the middle that was annoying me for 6 months, and I kept thinking about painting it out, and then I finally decided to let it live. But yeah, I don't know.
I didn't. I wasn't putting you on the spot to like.
You're
I
putting
just
me on the
wanted like.
spot here, Terry, right off
No,
the
no, I
bat.
just wanted to first because you went right where I thought you were going to make, and that you actually got the word curlicue in is just like perfect. So this painting is called Maker, and that's one of the reasons, or maybe the ultimate reason why I decided I wanted to show that view and then show this painting first, because again, as I said to you before we started, Joe, I've known your work and seen quite a bit of it since you first started showing. I've always been drawn to it, given my own sort of deep interest in the full breadth of like painting in New York in the 50s, early 60s, not just the canonical figures. I've taught there's probably former students in the room right now. I've taught a whole 15-week class on de Kooning many times when I was at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. But I wrote something down that if this was me sitting here like, okay, I'm going to start the text on Joe Bradley, how would I start it? Related to this painting, this show, again, called Maker. It's like 79 by 68 inches to give people a sense. The centimeters are on the gallery's website, if that's useful for you. So this is what I wrote. I said, Joe Bradley is now a fully unapologetic painter. And then I had two asides. One was, depending on my state of mind, and it's better than okay. Or the other aside was, and it's about time. So I'm curious about that. I also saw the little video clip on Instagram that the gallery posted of you painting, like moving the brush and painting.
Right. That was an earnest display.
Yes, well, that's an interesting word, but I'm curious about this because I've read your interviews and things, and knowing your earlier work. Is this true? How do you feel about that? That I want to start there.
I mean, my work has always been emphatically and first and foremost about painting, if you look at it. And I think there was a read early on that it was maybe more sort of critical, or that I was maybe taking pot shots at it in a way that I never really felt like that was accurate. If I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't have. I would have been doing something else this whole time.
Right, but okay, immediately I'm going to do what I told you that I had some, let's take some 2013. I can accept that because maybe I just am too much of a painting nerd when I look at a painting like this.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, and I want to push you a bit here, it feels like these paintings do give those people that maybe either don't know so much about painting or more don't care about painting, the idea that there is a kind of apology here. It's like, I'm kind of sorry this is a painting. I'm gonna have it. It's gonna the detritus on the floor, and it's kind of back in the 90s, the word abject probably would have come up if you were working back then. So again, I'm not talking about you. I could accept that your motivation was such. I'm talking about the reception in a context where, people still want to believe that somehow you have to apologize to make a painting, that you have to sort of give someone an out so that they're not stuck in really having to deal with the painting as painting.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've never thought of painting as something that is in need of rehabilitation or saving, or and
I'm going to go back to the.
I mean, by the time I began working seriously, the whole thing had been taken apart and put back together 100 times. So it was like, it didn't seem that anything was off limits or, too, I can't really articulate myself here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I never thought that I was doing anything that sort of, like radical or upsetting or anything like that, I mean,
Right.
it all seemed like kind of perfectly.
Yeah. And to be clear, I don't think you were either. I would not want to pursue that kind of way, but I could see the work enabling someone to convince themselves that was going on. And I'm not saying that I think that's a deficiency in the work. I think it actually it's contributed for me as someone looking at what we would call your development here since that time, just in these past less than 10 years since that painting, which was from 2013, that I mean, this sounds very cliche, but that those paintings are necessary for where you are now, which is a very obvious thing to say about a lot of painters. But I think particularly in your case, it's provocative in a sort of almost kumbaya for me, gives me hope kind of way.
Provocative in the sense that well, I mean, I think that I mean, the painting that we just looked at from 10 years ago, I couldn't make now.
Right.
That was I mean, shit, I guess I'm 47 now, so at that moment when nobody knows your name and you're sort of it's almost like you fire you're in a saloon or something and you fire a pistol into the ceiling to sort of get everyone to turn around, and you can only do that once or twice and then you start to look ridiculous,
Right.
you have to yeah.
Yeah, well, again, you're reinforcing things for me, because even like that anecdote or that you just said reinforces why, like, because I'm very immersed, as I said before, in like the abstract expressionism in a lot of the lesser knowns, like people around, like I could go off on a whole tangent here about Joseph Stefanelli, for example, that would be interesting to like look at his work again related to what you're up to. Not that your work looks like his, but that the range of, not to mention the whole, de Kooning, of course, was the one who just refused the whole, like, he's like, it's disastrous to label ourselves. He was not interested in like abstraction or representation. He was interested in painting. And I guess that's why I put you on that same place, that like, especially with this new work, this is where for someone like me, I could look at these. And again, I've not seen them in person, but I'm projecting into them that like there is a kind of like, I can accept this as real painting, like without the baggage of like what comes from the 50s. Like I saw the press release talks about you're challenging, and I'm not interested in that language anymore. I don't think painting's slow. I think some people like you're just, there. It's fine to be working in some of the territory that those people were working in. It wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago, and it got cut off prematurely by pop art. And I talked to Cecily Brown about this a lot, where I was like, she's like, we agreed that maybe she was the right generation to finally, she didn't have to worry about all the de Kooning problems that painters 10 years older than her had to worry about. Right. And I think there's some truth to that. And I think you have that too. You don't have to work. These paintings come off as not worrying about such things. Whereas again, looking at some of the earlier work, there could be a construction made, not only the paint, but you're making those robot, like playing off of like minimalist paint, you're like making this kind of like step to the side each time, almost conceptually. That well, again, I want to be clear here. The work is doing that. I'm less interested whether you were doing that, but the work out in the world, in a context, in a conversation, in a world where there's this real divide between like the gallery market scene that is awash in painting, most of it lousy right now, versus like the international biennial circuit where all those curators are still thinking it's the 90s and that like they're terrified of painting, but it's mainly because they don't know what to do with it. They weren't educated in it. In my experience dealing with them, it's almost not their fault, and these come along in this beautiful room, and these three are about the same size. They're all doing similar things. And that could be seen as old school in many ways, but I want to argue that it's not. It's just plugged into something that's been going on a hell of a long time and is still going to keep going on.
No, I think you're right on. And I mean, I don't sweat it. I don't think about, I take it for granted that art is made from other art largely, and I don't struggle with, I can't think of any influence that I think of as a burden or something that I have to overcome.
Right.
It's sort of fair game.
And
want
go
to
ahead.
That the New York school thing is, I mean, I understand why that would pop into somebody's head, but it feels overstated to me. I mean, it's that, of course, I've looked at those artists and enjoyed them and stolen a lot from them. But
should I show the one I told you I was going to keep secret?
Go for it. No, but I'm just saying, like, that not any more than 100 other artists.
Yeah, well, that's the point. 100 other. That's the point. That like, and I'm saying even 100 other artists, 200 other artists in the context of 1950s New York too, that all more knew each other more than we understand that they did, because we only know the few that sort of survived. But when I first got because I'm just too much of a nerd about these things, when I first got the images, I immediately, and it's not like, I mean, it hasn't been up in a while, but it's not like this painting is hidden. It's at the Guggenheim. But here's Grace Hardigan, 1958. Yeah. It's almost exactly the same size as your paintings. And I think that I'm a massive fan of hers and her relationship with Frank O'Hara and poetry. And Grace was up to something very powerful then that resonates now in relation to de Kooning, in relation, I guess the reason, I'm not saying it was like, oh my God, Grace Hardigan did it before. I'm not interested in that. Again, painting is slow. This whole before after thing just doesn't really work in painting. And I think most painters I know don't get too caught up in that, but when I saw that video of you painting, I'm like, okay, he's moving painting. I mean, again, if we put this painting on a wall across from yours, I guarantee you the conversation would be really robust and interesting. And
no, and you mentioned scale, that it's the same size, and
it's almost exactly the same dimensions.
No, that's something that I've really, I mean, the impact that those, if you stand in front of a whatever Pollock or a Rothko, and the kind of effect that those paintings have on your body,
right,
has always been interesting to me.
Well, the other segue I wanted to make, I just screenshotted from the Guggenheim so you could see, it's a painting called Ireland from 1958. It's, I mean, I've loved this painting for a long time. I was very lucky that my hometown museum when I was a kid had an early Larry Rivers, which is his attempt to repaint Courbet's The Burial. It's from like 1951. So I learned about these. I was 12, I learned about like Frank O'Hara in the Midwest, pretty early. And Grace, I was always fascinated by her work. But what I want to say then, and let's bring it back to the situation at hand. The show is called New Paltz. That painting of Grace's is called Ireland. It's from, she made her first trip to Ireland, which is where her ancestors were from. This idea of place in your work, the idea of the painting maybe as a place, how place functions for you. Is that something you're mindful of?
When I started to get this group together for this show, I remember thinking that there was an idea that I wanted them to have a sort of like a rural kind of laid back pastoral sort of feel. And so I think I had a list of titles for the show, and New Paltz, and I don't know if that's in evidence at all. I'm not even sure that intention really stuck around, but the title stuck. And New Paltz isn't a significant place for me. I think I've only been there a few times, but I like it had a nice ring to it, and I like the way it looks written down. It
sounds great. That word Paltz is a really good word. And new Paltz, new painting. I riffed on it like,
exactly right.
Like, let's call painting Paltz now. Like, Paltz would be a good word to call it.
Well, also I knew that obviously, the show was going to be in Europe. I wouldn't have named a show in New York New Paltz, because it just would have been too.
But there is a painting that, did you show at Petzl, the painting? There is a painting called New Paltz.
Yes, there is a painting called New Paltz.
Right.
And that's been a sort of reoccurring, I do that. I'll take the title of a painting, and the next show gets the same title as a way of sort of making
yeah, again, I get that and really appreciate that, because it does, this idea of the painting having a place, the painting, what was frustrating more and more about young art, and especially like the idea, like that artwork's got to find a place on its own ultimately. It's, and the meaning that you've put into it oftentimes very specific, requires, paragraphs. Just Charlie Ray talks about the fire hose of art history, and it just goes around blasting meaning off of objects, and painting is like a sponge or a battery for meaning. I think it can be recharged, filled, emptied over and over again. And the painting that lasts for us, I know is the painting that's capable of doing that. And again, I feel that your trajectory proves something I kind of felt from the beginning, which is like, yeah, you're the one of the ones that's doing that. Like, I love that this one's called Rathskeller. So like, okay, having been in some bars in the bottom of city halls in Europe, which is what a Rathskeller is, one of the meetings, okay, yeah, I get that. It could be, it's a great word. It could be hanging down there in one of those in like Kassel, or even a tinier town than Kassel in Germany or something, and it would just fit right in, and it would be okay. It would survive. It would survive, it would survive the ambiance, let's say.
That would be a good home for this place.
Yeah. But the idea of a Rathskeller also being, again, this is me just riffing on the title, which I think you said it's de Kooning used to, he would list the titles, and then like he and his friends would just sort of stick titles on paintings, and but the idea of placing it in the basement of a Rathaus, let's say, in Germany, is spot on to me. It's like, yeah, that's what this painting is doing. And that's the other thing that I'm so drawn to your work about, because I have always been mostly interested in what a painting does, more than what it means, or even what it looks like in some ways. Like, what's the painting doing? And I think these paintings are, well, I'll ask you, what are they doing? Like, what would you say about that? I'm just going to go to the next one too. This is called Van Dongen. Is that a reference to Kees Van Dongen?
That's sort of inside joke title.
Okay.
A friend of mine and I back at school had this thing about, I don't know, we thought of Van Dong. I know it's just such a stupid name that
It's a great word to get Dongen.
the idea was like you just bring Van Dongen up in crits or whatever as like a
Right.
way of trolling the professor.
Joe Bradley doesn't make paintings and drawings. He makes Paltz and Dongens.
What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. I don't know what it. I mean, it's funny
Doing like what they do.
Talking
like,
about these paintings. It's almost too soon to talk about them, really, for me. You know,
I can accept that. I can accept that.
I mean, of course, I agreed to do this talk, and we're here.
No, I get what you're saying. That like,
yeah, no,
again,
I mean, they left the studio mid-August, and you know, we hung them up in the middle of September, and of course, you know, I haven't seen them since. But I mean, I imagine that if you know, you stand in front of a painting and your mind is sort of cycling through whatever you know, whatever you're thinking about, and that's all fair game. And then I think that what it's doing something else on an energetic kind of level that maybe you're not even aware of.
right.
And that's not that, you know, I'm not saying that there's some profound operation happening, but I do think that it's you know, and I see myself, I'll stand in front of a painting and I can feel my mind is racing, trying to kind of like pin it down.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about, you know.
Right.
I mean, that's you know, these things that we think about when we're standing in front of a work of art are kind of hors d'oeuvres, and then the main course is a it's, you know, it transcends the rational mind, I guess.
Yeah. And just, you know, I want to make sure I'm really not determining New York School painting, because, you know, what I find interesting, getting very specific about these paintings, and this one is a perfect example for what I'm about to say. This painting couldn't be from 1958 because it just wouldn't have the range of gestures and sort of effects of the paint in the same way. Meaning that, you know, this is assimilating, you know, I know you're interested in oscillates, for example. You know, this is what I love about a painting like this, is that I can start with someone like Hartigan, but I can bring it through all sorts of people, really great artists since that time. And it doesn't get stopped by any of them. It's still doing a lot of its own things, and it's all kind of there. You know, I mean, Boswellitz's maybe rises a little more. There are passages in this that and I appreciate that, the sort of nuance of how the paint physically was put on and the relationships. You know, and let's not forget here, there ain't a drip to be found, right?
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the white lines? You know, like, I'm curious about the white lines, and, you know, the is that anything specific?
You know, that, a couple of years ago, I was working on a show that was called Sub-Ec at Eva Pressenhuber in Zurich, and it had been a little while. I had kind of there hadn't been a lot of drawing in my painting in some time. I had been painting with sort of a wide 2-inch brush, and there were these kind of sort of passages of color that were butting up against one another, and I think I had kind of run into a wall working in that fashion. I didn't really know where to go with it, And so I started drawing into the paintings first with black, and then that wasn't legible from across the room. So I started working in white. And then I like the way that white, the linear brushwork sort of sits on top of the painting in a way. And it's stuck.
Yeah, well, in a couple, we're gonna move more to white, but I also want to just generally ask you like about color. Like what, like the array of color in an individual painting is opened up, it seems. I'm not saying there aren't other paintings maybe from way before that have a lot of colors in them, but it just seems like that is another interesting shift here.
Yeah, no, I know. I had a pretty kind of reduced palette for a little while,
Right.
And yeah, at a certain point, it just didn't feel interesting to me anymore. And that's, painting works like that. You set up these little parameters, you set up parameters to work in, you have a little, some rules that you're working with, and then you deviate and you break the rule, and that keeps it interesting. It keeps it moving. But in this case, I think I sort of broke a number of rules all at once.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that's a sort of continuation in the work, I think, is this: the paintings resist the either or of abstraction or representation. Like, in the sense that all, the philosophical argument that every painting is an abstract painting, but that I was reading things and like people talking about some paintings where wanted to read the circles as like faces, or and then even like the relation to Calder, and there's figuration in Calder. I mean, there's the body, and
no, I'm really interested in Calder and in Miro and that sort of like quasi kind of cosmic abstraction, cartoonish mid-century happy-go-lucky painting. I look at Calder quite a bit, and
that comes through, I would say, in a good way. And also that, again, my point would be that Calder is misunderstood often in this sort of totalizing idea of abstraction. But if you really look, I mean, Alex DeCourt seems to have figured that out. He has this sculpture at the Louisiana and Den right now that's a riff on Calder with Big Bird hanging off one side, and I forget what's off the other, because it's from his childhood, or partially that's the reason. But the idea of not just the body, but the even, and this is the word I'm getting to here, the face. I mentioned before we started that I'm very good friends with Tal R, and I think about you and his work often and together. And Tal, in an interview once said, every painting has a face. It doesn't matter if it's Pizza or Jackson Pollock, it's a face. That face is looking at your face when you're looking at a face, when you're looking at a painting, no matter what it is. And, that riffs off de Kooning's whole famous quote about, if the painting has he uses the word countenance because he couldn't have brought himself probably in the 50s to use the word face. He would have gotten laughed at the Cedar Bar. But if it has a then he wants to find himself, and then he loses himself. And that if the painting has a countenance, then he either keeps it or throws it away. So all these sort of proclamations, but they're proclamations that just give him an out either way. That's what's so great. De Kooning's his work is about making all these proclamations, but he gives himself still the option of doing potentially completely contradictory things. And I sense that spirit in your work and in these paintings too, that they're not wishy-washy, they're not trying to have it all ways, but they are sly in that regard. They are able to stand their ground and be somewhere else at the same time. If that I'm taking it too far now, but
no, I appreciate that. And
I'm just,
faces and heads and in these paintings, and I'm always actually a little surprised when if someone's looking at them and they don't it doesn't register. I'm always a little bit like, wow, I thought I made that really explicit, but yeah.
Well, I think, again, my relatively cynical view of these days is that everyone is so caught up in content creation and how that relates to this, what I think is a very limited idea of meaning that, that's coming out of the complete deficiencies of, Instagram, let's say, for example, and there's just a whole group of viewers now that don't even know this. I'm going to be really awful here, and I apologize. That don't even know that they should be embarrassed about the way they don't know what they're looking at. And that's not just in art. That's, and again, I sound like that guy, and I guess I have to accept it in a certain regard, but that's why, like, it's like those people would think if someone's not doing that, it must mean, oh, it's old fashioned, like, or it's like it's retro or whatever. But like, that's what's so refreshing to me about this work, is that it's neither of those things. And again, I really appreciate that you said that it was too soon to talk about them, because part of my thing about a painting doing something is that the moment of its arrival on a wall is a new moment where it's going to start doing a lot of things that you don't even know yet. So like, how could the artist know? And the artist, the idea that the artist would know that,
That's the exciting thing about the gallery too. The gallery is so close to the studio. It's just like, you're really seeing something that's hot off the presses. And I would imagine usually the artist is kind of seeing it for the first time too.
Yeah.
I always feel that way.
Yeah. So the next one was, first the installation view. And again, like, say what those naysayers say what you want about the white cube, but boy, it still can work, for some things, I mean, I've not seen the painting in person, but this one I just particularly am drawn to, and I love the title again, Same Damn Chain Gang. Oh, I should say this one's called Angel Tech, another great title. I mean, I went to like the famous clay etching of the angel, like also like Picabia couldn't have figured out how to do all the different things he did, like in the same painting. And like you've now solved that problem for him in these paintings too, like, and again, my point is that problem was sort of held open way back then. And it's not that long ago, is what I keep harping on. Like this, of course, in 2022, Joe Bradley would sort of come along and, given the trajectory of his work, be doing these things. To me, it makes perfect sense.
These, Picabia left so many open doors. I mean, what a generous soul, I mean, yeah.
He was a fortune teller. Like, he really, he mapped out a good 100, who knows, it could be 500 years of painting after him. I don't know.
Somebody said that, can't remember who said it, but that he made Picasso look stupid.
Well, that just brings, what just popped into my head is like, if no one's going to misidentify, like walk in and really think this is like, a Grace Hardigan from the 50s. Although there are idiots out there. And I always use the anecdote that like Susan Sontag once went on a tirade complaining about she mistook David Hockney for Picasso, like, so, like no one's immune to potentially like, making a fool of themselves. But anyway, this painting, I love it. It's called Same Damn Chain Gang, which great title.
This painting feels like it will birth a number of other paintings.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. It makes sense.
There's 2 or 3 in a show that feel like they will, they'll lead the way to more, and this is one of them, I think.
Well, I also, to me, it's like, and correct me if I'm wrong, although wrong and right doesn't really function, I think. But but to me, I also see this as like that this painting, and again, I'm trying to make a distinction between you and the work, that the painting is sort of saying like, don't forget that I come out of like this other stuff that was happening in this enterprise a few years ago. There's something formally, there's something on the white, there's something about it's like, it's a kind of, I don't want to say looking backward because I'm not implying it's like retro or looking back nostalgically through your earlier work, but it's acknowledged like the energy and the things that are still available. And again, just from a few years ago in your work, is being acknowledged in this one and talked about or talked with. And I like that. I like when things like that happen.
No, it's not. I mean, you walk away from something, and then a few years later, you realize that maybe you say like, well, that's my work. I could use that. I could pick that back up and do something with it.
Right. The black spots. Am I wrong? Are that most of the time when you're doing that spotting, is it black, or are there some white ones too in other paintings?
Yeah, I think there was some white on black, some other. Yeah, that's a new dance move for me.
Yeah,
dabbing or whatever.
Yeah.
Which again, I mean, that's the sort of thing that there is a thrill in it, because I guess I've never liked that in other people's work. You know what I mean? Like I've always thought that was sort of a hack move to make like pointillist.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that's, again, how it works. You kind of, there's a kind of kink, you get a little thrill out of like deviating from your own set of rules for these things.
Can I get away with this kind of moment? And again, not necessarily have to like it, like.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, it's nice if I like squirming a bit.
That's a great word. That's a really great word for these. There is a kind of squirm in these paintings, I think, that is interesting and playful and meaningful potentially.
I think that I mean, I tend to paint straight out of the tube. I'm not mixing colors on a palette or whatever, and I don't like them to mingle on the canvas either. I don't like to have like one color bleed into another. So I'll typically paint that orange, and then I'll have to wait a couple of days to paint something else. And that kind of dabbing, or whatever you want to call it, was a way of getting two colors to live together in one neighborhood.
Right. Well, I think next, I'm looking at the time too. I just picked, there's a great installation of, your drawings, works on paper, all of which, you keep all your drawings untitled. Just give the audience a couple shots of how they were installed here in a couple groupings in the show. So there are quite a few of them. I just picked a few. Also I wanted to show this because there is a room where that group of drawings does interact with the paintings in what looks to be like a kind of great
Face Off.
Face Off. Yeah, that's yeah. And so I just, I've read you in interviews that talk about the works on paper. So I'm just curious if like the thinking is still like the thinking is consistent in the works on paper, how they relate to the paintings, like how, like maybe starting there.
I mean, you might have to remind me.
Well, I think that like, the drawings are a place where you're like, for example, I haven't brought up something that's clearly and self-evidently an influence, which is comics and the format of comics and cartooning, like your interest in that, your background. The drawings are a place that you're willing to go there. I mean, even like this is obviously like studies, but like that's all in the drawings more straightforwardly, I guess would be the word.
Yes. Yeah. Right. I do have a different, I mean, the stakes are so low with drawing or with my drawing. I mean, I can make a drawing in a minute or whatever. And so my policy with works on paper is, or it's not really a policy. I just do whatever I feel like,
Right.
and sometimes they'll say like, I made a lot of drawings of cows for some reason. And there was a couple of shots that I thought, well, wouldn't that be a good show to have a bunch of big paint, like, 8-foot paintings of cows.
Mm-hmm.
And just doesn't, like going through the formality of painting it just totally blows it, but but a little drawing, it kind of somehow survives.
Yeah. Well, the reason I picked this one, of a cow was because, yeah, that's what it's doing, but it's available for, again, like some fool like me to go riffing off of like, well, the range, what Picasso did. And then of course that Roy Lichtenstein, who, full disclosure, I worked for a few years when he redid the Picasso sort of the cow becoming more abstract.
Sure.
Yeah. So I thought, okay, this is like, is this a cow like behind Robert Morris or John McCracken or something? Like, it's not, I know that, but I like to pretend that maybe it could be. But it's like figure ground, it's doing all these things figure ground wise in a very, it's like it's greater than the sum of its part, or maybe its effort. I don't know. It's sort of exponentially for me. And I think that's the great thing that can happen in like quick drawing being just something that just sort of is hanging around the studio and you just do it and let it pile up.
Sure. No, I mean, the drawings have something in common with the drawings that we make when we're on the phone with, Con Edison or whatever, like that. There's something about that kind of mindless activity. No, I loved like shop worn motifs, like when you like a cow, it's just such a low stress sort of subject matter to paint because it's like, totally emptied of meaning from being painted 1,000 times.
Yeah. And it also allows for like, this is like the perfect sort of fuck you to the word, like, and I love that cutout triangle. Like, did that happen for a reason, or like the fact?
No, my children, I have kids, and they will be drawing, and sometimes they'll leave behind something like this, and I think, all right, I'll take that to studio and do something with it. But this is, I mean, it's these, I think that the titles, we were talking about titles, and they are important, and they're sort of an olive branch to the world of language, and so I don't know, having a little bit of language in the drawings, it's kind of satisfying, you know,
Yeah. But then keeping them all untitled in terms of the title of the artwork is also reinforcing that, I think.
no, it's
So like the language, though, it's in the work. I also have to say this again, this is how weird I am these days, is that like when I first saw the cutout triangle, it made me think of this. I don't know if you know, you maybe don't know, but recently Doritos was doing this whole thing about finding triangles and like people holding up like Dorito, like, and I thought, oh my God, finally someone's working with form. Like someone's did. I just thought like, okay, there's someone, like if I was a kid on Instagram, I would be like totally doing a photo, a meme of like putting a Dorito up against that triangle hole and like taking a photograph of it. So I mean, if people are thinking about form with Doritos,
yeah, hey,
more power to
Doritos, if you're listening and you want to
hey, yeah. I think I did put this one in too, because it's a nod to, for me, right, it's a nod to the earlier. I'll just go ahead and like to these, that's like is it called running or something like that? Running.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, and the drawing, I mean, the drawing.
And then, sorry, I'll just show this one, which I love.
I think the drawings are all dated 2022, but I just sort of, rifled through my flat files, and that could be like 10 years old or whatever. I don't really, right. I usually just date things when they leave.
Yeah, I like that too. Like art again with Roy once, we had a moment, it's pre-internet, digital cameras, where we had black and white photographs of every painting he made from 61 to 69 printed out on Xerox paper and just on the floor of a huge gallery. And again, I had no camera, but here's Roy on his hands and knees, looking on, going like on them, and he's moving things. We're trying to get them in an order, like he made, and then he does something, and I look at my colleague, and then he does something else. I'm like, we got to get him out of here. He's making shit up now, but that's an artist's job to sort of like, the date is. That date is one of the least fixable things in the work for an artist, in my opinion. Well, I think we're at a good spot to see if there are questions. Well, I have a feeling because I was sharing my screen, Carolyn, I actually wasn't really paying attention to the chat. So maybe I'm going to stop sharing for now. And do you want to maybe?
Great. Yeah. No, thank you so much. We got so many amazing questions in. It's like we could definitely do a part 2 of this, but I'm going to just pass the mic to my colleague, Chloe, first, who's going to sort of synthesize a couple of these amazing questions for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. And thank you, Terry, for that amazing conversation. We had several questions come in about the formal qualities of the work, Joe. So I'm going to combine a few of them. Alan, Candida, and Timothy in the audience asked each of these questions, which all kind of can be answered together or in little separate strands. The first one being, since the lines capture and contain many of the shapes, what do you feel the lines in your work do for you? Curious as well about how the color evolves through your painting. And then the last question in those synthesized questions is, several of the paintings that have been seen in the show juggle a lot of formal problems, including shape, line, color, texture. These are not anti-form paintings. They're containers packed with formal problems existing all at once. And as you paint, are there problems that you reject or edit out? What isn't allowed in the painting and why?
It's a lot of questions.
Have at it, Joe.
That's one of many.
I mean, I mentioned that the linear work, I had this desire to sort of introduce more drawing into the painting, and for whatever reason, it took a minute. But it's really sort of, it sped things up in a nice way. It felt like I had a hand tied behind my back, and I mean, last year was a weirdly productive year for me, like I think I've painted like 40 paintings or something, which is like, I'm kind of a lazy, usually it's like 20 or whatever. So that's exciting. And shit, that last one was just, there were a lot of questions in there. I'm not sure where to begin, but it sounded like he or she or they were describing painting in a nutshell, in a way. I mean, they're all of those concerns are there. I don't know a good way of answering that question.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you so much, Joe, and everyone for those
Oh.
questions. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Raven next to ask a question on behalf of someone.
Hello. So the question I'm asking is on behalf of Anne. Joe, the paintings are so physical. Can you talk about the spiritual process that goes along with that? What sort of travel is painting for you?
It's another tough one. I mean, I do, painting is so sort of integrated into my own life and the way that I navigate the world and refine my own sort of ideas and sensibilities about life, that it's hard for me to compartmentalize. I mean, it's absolutely for lack of a better word, it's a spiritual pursuit or activity or practice. Shit, what was the second part of that question?
What sort of travel goes along, or what sort of travel is painting for you? And then she asked, can you talk about the spiritual process that goes along with that?
Yeah, no, it's really, again, very much braided into my life and my sort of yeah, I don't know. That's a difficult question to answer. I'm not sure if I have a satisfying answer for that one.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you for that question, Anne. Let's see, next I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Eleanor to ask a question on another audience member's behalf.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Joe and Terry. It's been really great. I will be asking a question on behalf of Marie today. Marie asks, is there a conscious connection to a dialogue with the Cobra painters, particularly Azure Billy and Azure Jorn?
Not really. I mean, that's something that comes up regularly, and somebody will remind me to look at Jorn, or and I like that stuff, but I can't say that it's been a real heavy influence on my own work. There's a great stone carver from that school called Henry Hurup that I'm quite interested in. If you go to Louisiana, there's little sculptures of his outside in the garden. Really, really beautiful stuff.
Great, thank you. Let's see, next we have one from Julia. I'm just going to ask on your behalf here. Julia wants to know, are Joe's big paintings made over years, months, or days? Does he start and go and come back many times over and carry on? Is there a method / rules to this? How do you know it is finished?
They do tend to take months and sometimes years to complete. And yeah, I mean, it's a process of improvisation, and it kind of, they unfold pretty slowly. You know, I'll work on them a little bit and then let them sit and look at them for a while, lose contact with the painting and then go back into it. And for whatever reason, this has become important, that, you know, if I'm painting, if I lay the brush down, I might be responding to a mark that I made 6 weeks or 6 months before. And I think that that does lend a certain, I think the result, you couldn't get that in an afternoon or a week, you know, it's something that does happen rather slowly. And then they kind of, it's interesting because they kind of reach, usually things just sort of slow down, you know, and then I'll think to myself like, wow, I haven't touched this thing in 6 weeks, you know, and there's sort of a kind of a standoff, and you realize like, wow, okay, I guess this is finished, you know. So there's not like a really, like a cathartic moment of, you know, it just kind of, there's a recognition that comes into focus over time.
Great, thank you, Joe. Let's see, I'm going to go to David Rich next. You should be able to unmute to ask.
Yeah. Hey, so Joe, I like this thing you said a couple of moments ago about how that painting process for you is just totally braided into your everyday, you know, thinking and being and processing, inquiring, improvising, just living, you know. So even though you maybe sounded like that wasn't that much of an answer, I just wanted to say that I'm feeling that if one lives with one's work process in an honest way like that, it actually is kind of spiritual without having to make a big pronouncement about that.
Totally. Yeah. No, I wouldn't compartmentalize the
Yeah.
spiritual. I think everything is spiritual. If you work at the DMV,
If you're doing it right.
Your yoga, or even if you're not doing it right, you're just doing it at a slower tempo, I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you, Joe. Let's see, next we have a question from Natasha. I'm going to ask on her behalf. She says, huge congrats on your show. It seems like all of the formal elements you explored separately or individually in previous bodies of work all came together in this show and in Boga Marga, gesture, line, and blocky grounds. Was this a conscious decision going into the new work or something that was gradual? And are there many paintings that you don't show because they don't fit a particular grouping of work for a show?
Well, that's it. Not, you know, making some sort of marriage of these sort of different aspects of my own work. It's not a conscious desire, really, but I'm happy with that read. And that's and no, I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of like leftover paintings that don't usually you know, it's like this, the skin of my teeth, like I need 12 paintings and these 12 paintings are the show. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, promise we won't hammer you too much further. We just have a couple more questions.
I've got nowhere to go.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Eleanor to ask.
All right. Thank you so much for these awesome questions. We have one from Katerina. She is asking, who is your favorite artist at the moment?
I'm going to say Alice Mackler is my favorite artist at the moment. I just love these. I don't know if our audience is familiar with her work, but she's, I think she's about 90 years old, and she makes these wonderful little sculptures and ceramics. They're painted ceramics, and they just really, they really move me. They're really, really wonderful, wonderful works of art.
Cool. Thank you. And Charles Webster, if you're here, you should be able to unmute and to ask your question.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, Charles, how you doing?
Chuck. Yeah, my question is that the painting seems to cycle between sometimes places you go through, you're walking through the painting inside it, or things within places that are acting within those places. Do you think you arrive at either of those conclusions in the picture, or attempt to reject one set of aspects of the picture, which I think is probably true? Yeah, that's the question.
Hold on, I think I got lost there somehow. So the
painting seemed to go through like being a place you go through, or a thing within a place.
Okay.
That it's strictly a place or strictly something acting on a stage. Do you go to both of those conclusions, or do you think you want to stick with one, or neither?
I would tend to identify them more with an actor on a stage, I would say, you know.
Yeah.
Place and face.
Huh?
But there's something which is on a stage, and it says, oh, okay, I'm going to go this way, or I'm going to do this dance. And then
no, and I think if you look at
Yeah.
these recent paintings, there's to me a pretty overt figure ground thing happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they feel
I think you're totally right. Well, it's the idea of and also the lines seem to echo the hand, so that I can sort of grab one of the white lines and I can just pull my way into the painting and go along with it.
Right.
That's what I feel about in them. It's like I'll just grab onto the white line and just swing over into the carousel.
Rope or something. I like that read. And I
Yeah.
know there's something really satisfying about just, you know, painting like a 6 foot kind of line like that. I just hadn't allowed myself that pleasure in a while.
That's a good wave.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff.
Right on, man. Thanks. Good to see you, bud.
Thank you, Charles, for that question. And I'm going to turn it over to our very own Fong Bui to ask the final question today.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Terry. Yes, I heard in and out bit here. I'm sure everyone have too, but I think, Joe, before I ask my question, I kind of like to make a little haiku comment. I think Joe is probably one of the most elusive painter of his generation. That's why we start talking, you know, from all perspective here, Terry. My grandmother, who once told a terrific story that Buddha told, which I did not know that Buddha had such a great sense of humor. It's about a man who would run in from a lion, the tiger that chases him, until he come to the edge of a cliff. There he found a vine and he swung over. So he's holding the vine, there's still the same tiger peering down on him. And lo and behold, he heard another snoring sound and looked down, there's another tiger peering up at him. So he's caught between the two tigers. It's what my friend Lisa described, it's called situation. You know, he caught between the two tiger, and then out of the blue, there are two mice, one black mouse and one white mouse. They start choosing away of the vine. So he's seeing they chewing very quickly to the vine. So with the left hand, he's holding tightly, and in front of his face, right by the cliffside, there's a bunch of delicious grapes. So with one hand, he hold to the vine, the other, he'd reach out and he'd pick one grape. He took a bite and he say, how delicious. And I think that's maybe my cryptic way of describing Joe. He's so elusive, you know. I think early on, when I remember the first show in Canada, those simple drawing on unprimed cotton duck, grease pencil. And I was very haunted by them because I did not know how to read them at all. But they lie between sign, like a sign, you know, stop, green light, do not enter. And then they also function also like a symbol, you know, like a peace symbol or cross, whatever. They always extrapolate right in between. That's why it's so hard to talk about humor, which is so demonstrative, and irony in the drawing. The painting is something else. But my question is leading to this, Joe. Wouldn't you agree that this new group of body paintings are the first that you able to somehow to offer more integration of drawing as part of the painting?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I think that's again a really satisfying turn in my own studio, my own work as of recently, is just integrating more drawing into the process. And yeah, I would say just in general, kind of allowing more in, you know, like it's funny that we would usually imagine that we get more and more conservative as we get older. But I think that in terms of art, like I feel like I like more and more the older I get, you know, and the idea is just to let more and more into it, you know, yeah, I think I was more opinionated about art when I was a younger guy, and I don't know where I'm going with this answer. It's just a crazy trip. But anyways, I love the anecdote from the Buddha.
No, but it's the drawing tickles the painting, Joe. I think that's where it somehow get transcended into painting more and more now. But as Terry, reference to the Kunin, who also was very elusive, who was extremely susceptible to the environment wherever he was living at the time, whether in New York, congested space in the 50s, you saw that in Gotham News, and then he moved to the Hampton, and it's opened up, north of the river. So we know that, but it's not, I don't think it's, I would think of the Kunin in that context, but I don't think the pictorial language at all when I think of Joe's work. Yeah, because there's something else going on there in the work that is so elusive. And I think David was right to requote that everyday life, because there's urban energy there that is equally present in this work as it is, as you mentioned, pastoral, Joe. But yeah, that was I was lucky to see the paintings before they got shipped to Hopkins Gallery. So it was terrific. So I sent huge congratulations, Joe, and thank you.
Fong.
Yeah.
I just want to riff off your haiku and just remind you of that great anecdote that de Kooning told once that relates to what Joe's talking about here, where someone was asking about abstract, and he tells the story about the man who crumpled up all the dry bread crumbs all over his floor so he could walk on them. And de Kooning says, I don't know what it meant, but he had a very abstract look on his face. that elusiveness is it's elusive, but it's elusive with a real sort of purpose and a kind of it's not elusive in terms of slippery, I would say. It's more like the Buddha idea, more sort of really lush idea of elusive that Joe.
Yeah, elusiveness with a complete mindfulness.
Right.
I think that's what it is. Yeah, thank you, Terry, for that comment. Yeah, thank you, Joel.
Thank you,
Thank
Fong.
you, everyone. Back to you, Carolyn.
Thank you so much, Fong. And thank you, Joe and Terry. What an incredible conversation. We have a tradition here at the Rail of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm really thrilled to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Greg Masters, to the stage. Greg Masters has published 10 books of his writing over the past decade under his imprint Crony Books. The latest collection of poems is The Complete Thoughts of Greg Masters, out this March. And he is also in our September issue of The Rail. Thank you so much, Greg, for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Carolyn. And thank you, Joe and Terry and Brooklyn Rail for having me. Joe, I really like your work. And it's a good lead into my first poem, which is about the work of Matthew Wong, which I saw at Shaman Reed in May. In the spring, the exhibition lasted all summer. So this is called Matthew Wong, The New World. I've assembled for you the opposite of indifference, with strokes, dabs, flourishes, and color, stark, congenial, devoid of shadow and any pretense to appease your expectations. Here I invite you in to witness what you can never see. With an echo of remembrance and sense impression, let me show you unclothed figures in a jungle so fertile no white shows through on the paper necessary to state my dream. Not what was seen, but an alteration into a new language to wreathe imagined memories with variations. I can illustrate thoughts and decorate what only I have seen, and here present my efforts for you. A rift in the fabric, suggestions of what might be, or for me are, a melody of the vernacular, a screech through the flowers, a splayed fruit enticed by geometry. We see from behind a man in the midst of a meadow before what might be a pond, could be a portal. I taught myself to paint these translucent ciphers and teetering stamps of attestation to arm myself against futility with allegiance to breath, not to comply, but to examine, invent, and forge anew, unencumbered with precedent. Join me in my shout in the void or soft pronouncement in the light, amid the high mountains and deep sea. Despite all outward signs of my genius, or whatever it's to be called, a reckoning with the moment, invented until I couldn't. And then to change pace, this was on the online version in the Brooklyn Rail. Ballad of the Fallen. For a time in 6th grade, my best friend Anthony Shalley and I exchanged stories we'd written for the amusement of each other. No one ever saw these communiques until a classmate found one of the handwritten compositions that must have fallen to the floor and turned it in to our teacher, Mrs. Sarah Dobrin. Panic ensued as she began an inquisition to determine who had defiled her and brought dishonor unto her household. The story involved her husband, Harry, being in a cage at the zoo. Each student in the class had to approach her desk at the front of the classroom and provide a writing sample so comparisons could be made and the culprit behind this egregious act of subversion of all that was holy might be brought to justice. In my defense, I should interrupt the narrative to declare that she was a terrible teacher and a bitter, mean woman, though, of course, at that age, I only knew to be respectful to my elders and bow to their every determination. The interrogation ended with me, the winner. It was I who had scrawled this slap in the face of the foundation of American order and propriety. What was to be done? The scandal rocked the classroom, disrupted our usual period of mediocre learning. That's putting it kindly. It was decided that I should go home and come in next day with an apology. This was to become the make or break point in my development as a young lad. My mother was appalled at my transgression. Not that I'd shown promise as a creative writer, exchanging stories with a friend, a burgeoning, talented individual, showing interest in something beyond the rote learning of the classroom, distinguishing myself with poignant observations expressed in a witty manner. Nay, she availed herself not of my brilliance. At home that night, my mom was taking the side of the authorities. My future as a normal person was in danger. No pride in my creative accomplishments, no compliment for my efforts as an entertainer. Rather, a sentencing to toe the line, bend me to fulfill my obligation as a productive, non-unique member of society. Oh, if I'd gotten one glimpse of any sort of alliance, a whisper of support. But no, the only course of action was an apology next morning. My crying was not admitted as evidence in the courtroom of family jurisprudence. My impulse to shape my circumstances into outpourings of amusement for a close bonding with a buddy who was evolved enough to share a point of view receptive to parody and questioning of the status quo, thrown out of court. The apology was delivered. But good people, this wasn't enough. A punishment was to be meted out. How best could I suffer beyond my humiliation? You will resign from the school safety patrol. I was branded, made to turn in my cool plastic sash that granted me the power to assist my younger schoolmates to cross the intersection safely. Every morning before school and every afternoon as school was dismissed, I'd been dutifully manning, well, buoying my post. But now the civic order was being dismantled so I could bear the weight of shame before my peers and be shunned from sixth grade polite society, cast out of the legion of proper behavior, kids with promise and rich futures ahead of them. No longer was I entitled to the pastures of plenty and the vague promises we'd all been fed. Then JFK was shot and the so-called American dream ended as well for the rest of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you so much, Greg, for that reading. And thank you endlessly, Joe and Terry and everyone at Xavier Hopkins for helping make today possible. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on the Rails YouTube channel. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. And please join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with artist Rin Johnson and Ksenia Sobolova. You can now turn your microphone on and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so
So
much.
much.
Thank you so
Joe.
much.
Go, Bradley.
Enjoyed
Thank
that a lot,
you.
man.
Thank
Enjoyed
you.
that conversation.
Hi, David. Rich.
And if you're in Brussels, go see the show.
Yes.
Yeah, I wish it was New Paltz. That's closer.
Congratulations, Joe.
Brussels. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Joe.
Thank
Great.
you, Joe. Congratulations. Thank you, Terry. You're great.
Hello from Kittery, Maine.
Woo-wee.